The first night, I understood my grandmother wasn't human. She stood at the foot of my bed and smiled like someone showing off a secret they had no intention of sharing. That smile wasn't the warm, crinkled thing I remembered from my childhood. It was too wide, the skin pulled taut over teeth that caught the moonlight like shards of bone. I froze, more from recognition than fear. Everything inside me cataloged the wrongness, the way a moth finds a crack in a lamp. I grew up in that house. The room still kept the shape of my childhood, a hallway that always smelled faintly of boiled cabbage, a living room cluttered with lace doilies and porcelain saints, and my grandmother's bedroom where the window curtains never matched the sun. After my parents moved away, she stayed. I moved back because the mortgage was cheaper here, and because, selfishly, I liked that there was at least one person left who remembered my real name without asking. At first, she was only old, the kind of old that moved through a house like a draft, trailing the scent of mothballs and stale tea. But small things began to gather at the edges of ordinary life and form patterns I couldn't unsee. There were noises that didn't belong. At night, the house made the usual sounds. Pipes ticked, the old heater sighed. But beneath those, there was a softer rhythm, like nails drawn across wood in time with my heartbeat. I thought it was the house learning me. Instead, it was her. She would sit in her favorite chair by the window and hum under her breath in a scale that never resolved, an animal's melody that made the hairs on my forearms stand up. Sometimes I caught her watching me with a patience that felt like a trap. Her eyes, God, her eyes, reflected light wrong, as if they were lenses polished on the inside. When she blinked, it was a fraction of a second too late. Food changed. Plates on the table would be scraped clean in ways I would not have thought possible for a frail woman whose hands trembled. The tea kettle would be empty when I was sure I'd left it full. Once, I found a circle of dirt in the backyard, as if someone had knelt and smoothed the earth with long, deliberate motions. The dog, which had slept at my feet for years, stopped coming upstairs after a week. At first, I told myself fatigue, grief, the trick of a mind that expects ghosts and then misreads ordinary signs. But exhaustion didn't explain the cold breath I felt against my neck one morning when I hugged her goodbye. A breath that smelled faintly of iron and old paper and something vegetal I couldn't name. When I asked her about the humming or the empty plate, she laughed and said I had been imagining things. She said I worried too much. Her voice was soft, obliging, like a curtain descending. Yet when she touched my arm, her fingers were unnaturally dry, and her nails were pointed in a way that made me look away. That night, as I lay awake listening to the house breathe, I made a list in my head of everything that could have an explanation. Dementia, loneliness, the slow decay of a body. I slept poorly and dreamt of hands without faces. After the dreams began, the house slipped from familiar into foreign like a wet glove. I told myself dreams were the reason I woke with my sheets tangled around my legs and my throat full of grit, but the evidence piled up in daylight. One morning, I found the kitchen clock stopped at 3:13 and a smear of something dark on the rim of the sink. Not blood, too thin, more like ink washed through rust. Once in the hallway, I discovered my grandmother's slippers arranged facing the wall, toe to toe, as if she had been listening to it. I snapped a picture on my phone, and the image turned out grainy in a way my camera had never been. The pixels around her hands bled into the wallpaper. She became bolder. Where she had hummed, now she sang fragments of lullabies I had never heard before, lines that bent meaning until they sounded like warnings. Her movements grew precise and wrong, like a marionette given a private life. She would appear in doorways I had just passed through, slim in the darkness, palms cupped like she carried something alive. Once she followed me into the attic, where the dust made tiny storms with each step, and I found the light off. I remember the smell then. Not mothballs, but damp iron, and something like soil from a grave. There was a small dent in the floorboard, carved recently, and under it a stack of photographs tied with a string. I should have burned those photos. I didn't. I opened them and watched my childhood rearrange itself. There were pictures of family gatherings where one face in the background blurred into shadow. In others, someone had taken scissors to mouths until smiles were ragged holes. In one, my mother was present, but her eyes were papered over with tiny pins. My hands shook so hard I had to sit down until the attic whirled away and became the kitchen again, and my grandmother was behind me on the stairs, humming that slow, unresolved scale. She said quietly, "They don't like to be forgotten." Her breath fogged the air beside my ear, and I felt, clearly, physically, that something had been pulled from the back of my throat, a memory missing, like a thread. The neighbors stopped visiting. Mrs. Alvarez from next door, who used to bring empanadas and gossip, dropped off a casserole and then never returned my calls. At the grocery store, someone paused when I introduced myself as her grandson, and then stared at me with that same delayed blink I had seen in my grandmother. People began to look as if they were waiting for permission to forget. I caught my reflection in a hallway mirror and saw, for a heartbeat, my grandmother's silhouette overlaying my own, her shoulders hunched, her hands like branches. I slammed the bathroom door and laughed because laughter feels like proof of sanity, and then the pipes answered in a tapping that spelled my name. That night, while the rest of the house slept, the dog whined quietly and then stopped. I walked to the living room and found her chair empty and the radio playing an old station I didn't recognize. The volume ticked up by itself, and through the crackle a voice, thin and layered, like vinyl recorded on top of vinyl, whispered, "We are patient." I backed away until the wall met me, palms flat against plaster that had teeth. The house was no longer a shelter, it was a thing that listened. And whatever sat in my grandmother's bones was learning my name. I decided to leave. It felt simple in the moment. Gather a bag, lock the door, drive until the town blurred into something that didn't remember my childhood. It was the only plan that felt honest. But plans are paper. The house was wind. The first obstacle was small and domestic. The front doorknob stuck as if wrapped in spider silk. When I forced it, the wood protested with a keening like an animal. The lock turned and the hallway lengthened in the wrong direction. I could hear her humming from everywhere and nowhere, the same unfinished scale that tightened my lungs. Downstairs, the photographs lay on the table where I had left them. Each image had been unbound, spread like an accusation. I scraped them up with shaking hands and set them alight in the sink. The flames took the ink in greedy tongues, and for a moment I felt relief, heat that answered the cold. Then the smoke turned sweeter, like burning paper mixed with something damp, and the flames went out, as if the air decided it preferred shadows. The photos were damp where they had been dry. The faces looked up at me with mouths I had not remembered. One by one, names I had thought fixed began to slip from me. I tried to speak my mother's name, and my throat closed around consonants that would not form. She came into the kitchen without noise, though the floor should have creaked. Up close, her face was a map of things that should not map together. Flayed smile, skin drawn thin, eyes that never quite settled. She offered me tea as if nothing had happened. I clutched the mug with both hands and tasted iron and earth. "They come back," she said, and the words were not hers. They were older, layered beneath. "If they remember, we have to teach them again." I shoved her. She did not fall. Her head tilted like a doll's and she laughed softly, the sound of keys being turned in a lock. "Leave," she said, and the house laughed with her. At the door, the light was wrong, a flat kind of day that made skin look like wax. I ran for the car, but the street outside folded in on itself. My car was an impossible distance away. Doors became windows, windows became faces. I began to understand a cruelty that had nothing to do with bones. Forgetting was a shape, and she had learned how to carve it. Someone, or something that sounded like someone's voice, called my name from the porch. It was my voice, except older, threaded with the same patient music that had followed me for days. I stepped toward it and felt the floor pull like water. My hands found a mirror by accident, and for a second I saw the truth reflected plainly. My grandmother's shoulders on my frame, her fingers closing around mine. I watched my own face smile back at me with teeth that were not mine. I opened my mouth to scream, and the sound that came out was small, obedient, and very, very old. She smiled with my mouth.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.